Hi, welcome to season 2 of Pamela Price Unfiltered. I'm your host, Pamela Price, and this is the space and the place for real talk. This podcast season is sponsored by the Eloise Real Estate Group. Eloise Middleton is more than a licensed real estate professional. She is a miracle worker. With over 30 years experience in the Bay Area market, she specializes in residential real estate, single family and income properties, including luxury homes, probate trust sales, first-time home buyers, and investors. Their motto is selling real estate is what we do, service is who we are. If you are in the market for residential real estate, call Eloise Middleton at 510-386-0547. Welcome to Pamela Price Unfiltered. Let's talk about it. Welcome to Legally Speaking. There's a major redistricting fight unfolding in the Supreme Court. While California voters are deciding whether to pass Proposition 50 to adopt an emergency redistricting map, the United States Supreme Court is also making a major decision about redistricting. The case is called Louisiana versus Callais, and it was argued in the Supreme Court on October 15, 2025. It's a voting rights case out of Louisiana, where a congressional district was created to remedy past discrimination against Black residents. Based on proven violations of the voting rights of Black voters and relying on the Voting Rights Act, the Louisiana legislature created a minority opportunity voting district. This is the kind of district that is a tool under the Voting Rights Act to give minority voters a fair chance to elect a representative to fight for their priorities. This is critically important everywhere, but especially in Louisiana, where the racial disparities between Blacks and whites are stark in almost every area. Louisiana has a huge number, millions of almost 5 million Black people live in Louisiana. It's one of the largest Black populations across the South. In 2000, though, one estimate was that the unemployment rate for whites was 4.7%. It was 13.6% for Black residents of Louisiana. The unemployment rate for the entire state was 7.3%, compared to 13.6% for Blacks. The per capita income for whites in Louisiana was $20,488, while the per capita income for Black folks was only $10,166. The Louisiana case was argued before the Supreme Court in March of 2025, but was not decided in the last term. The court ordered another argument and specifically directed the parties to address the question whether the creation of the second majority Black voting district violates the 14th or the 15th Amendment. Even though the state of Louisiana created the voting district to remedy past discrimination, the state's attorneys are now arguing against their own creation. If the court rules in favor of the state of Louisiana and upholds the lower court's decision to throw out the voting opportunity district, it will essentially repeal the Voting Rights Act of 1965. The fear is that there will simply be no way to enforce the law. It will exist on the books, but without a remedy. This right-wing court appears to be leaning to rule that a remedy for race discrimination, for decades of race discrimination, is in fact race discrimination. Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is what prohibits racially discriminatory voting practices. If the court removes that tool, not much is left. And advocates say we will be back in the pre-1965 era. They also warn that what happens in the South will not stay in the South. Republican legislatures across the South can draw gerrymandered voting districts to prevent black people from electing representatives to Congress. The Republicans have a playbook, just as they did after Reconstruction, on how to eliminate black representation at the national level and at the state level. Their goal is the same today as it was centuries ago: preserve white supremacy by any means necessary. It is a goal that is not limited to the South. They have targeted counties in Missouri, New York, Indiana, and Ohio for gerrymandering voting districts. While the majority of black voters are in the South, everyone's right to vote will be impacted by these tactics and the soft rhetoric that supports them. The most devastating part, however, will be a Supreme Court decision that serves the goals of white supremacy without apology. Louisiana versus Callais could be the Dred Scott case of our time and our future. This podcast season is sponsored by Lawyers for the People. Lawyers for the People represent clients who have suffered serious injuries or death from police or negligent jail deputies and medical staff. Lawyers for the People was founded by Dante Pointer and Patrick Bullner, former associates of John L. Burris. They believe in using the law as a sword and a shield for their clients. They handle personal injury, civil rights, employment discrimination, jail abuse, and police brutality cases all over California. They don't just talk about results, they get them. Call 510-617-1938 for a free case evaluation. This season is also sponsored by the Shukla Law Firm, a leading San Francisco law firm that advocates for employee rights. Attorney P. Bobby Shukla is the 2024 San Francisco Trial Lawyers Association Trial Lawyer of the Year, with a winning record against major corporations and government agencies for harassment, discrimination, retaliation, whistleblowing, and pay equity. When you need a trusted advocate to get your voice heard and want action, call the Shukla Law Firm at 415-847-3983. My very special guest today is attorney Carl E. Douglas. Carl Douglas is in private practice at the Douglas Hicks Law Firm in Los Angeles. Mr. Douglas is the former managing attorney at the law offices of Johnny L. Cochran Jr., where he worked for more than 11 years until opening his own practice in March 1998. While Mr. Douglas worked with Johnny Cochran, Mr. Douglas represented scores of clients and tried dozens of cases to verdict in a wide array of matters. Besides the O.J. Simpson case, for which he is well known, Mr. Douglas has represented a broad cross-section of celebrity athletes and entertainers in several high and low-profile matters, including Michael Jackson, Jamie Foxx, Dr. Melina Abdullah, and Queen Latifah. Since opening his own law firm, Mr. Douglas has also enjoyed unprecedented success. In a products liability case, he helped obtain a $4.9 million verdict against General Motors Corporation, which was the largest personal injury verdict ever awarded in United States history at that time. He also got a plaintiff's verdict of $8 million against the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department for an in-custody death of an unarmed African-American man. Most recently, in August 2025, Mr. Douglas received a $3.8 million verdict for a Los Angeles filmmaker and his daughter injured and falsely imprisoned by LA Sheriff's deputies during the George Floyd protest in 2020. Among his many honors is the Lauren Miller Lawyer of the Year by the John M. Langston Bar Association, not once, but twice. Trial Lawyer of the Year in 2006 by the Consumers Attorney Association of Los Angeles, the largest local association of plaintiffs' attorneys in the United States, and being featured in ESPN's critically acclaimed award-winning documentary 30 for 30, O.J. Made in America, for his work coordinating O.J. Simpson's successful criminal defense dream team. Mr. Douglas earned his undergraduate degree in political science from Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, and his law degree from UC Berkeley Law. He is a frequent lecturer and motivational speaker at community-based and legal seminars across the country and has served as a legal commentator on various radio and television programs throughout the country. On a personal note, Mr. Douglas and I went to law school through law school together, and I have watched his career unfold with immense pride. I am truly honored to have Carl E. Douglas as my special guest, kicking off season 2 of Pamela Price Unfiltered. Doug, welcome to the show.
Ms. Price, it is always a pleasure being on your show. And if I can make one small correction, that verdict against General Motors was 4.9 billion with a B.
Yes. Billion with a B. Excuse me. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that. Well, you have been very busy and very successful serving our community. You know, as we left law school, we went through law school, we both knew that one day our mission was to take the law and to use it for the people. And you certainly have done that. So kudos to you for sure.
Well, my sister, I have always been inspired by you because I knew of all the challenges that you took on even before you became a new student at what was then called Boat Hall Law School.
Yes, well, we all came to the table with our history. And
absolutely.
We brought it and we left with it because we knew that no matter what we were learning there, that it had a purpose for us.
Indeed.
So tell my audience about this latest case, which is so timely. You just got a major verdict in a protest case, representing a protester. And across the country now, we see protesters being assaulted and injured by law enforcement forces everywhere. So tell us about the case.
Well, Pamela, this was a protest that is 5 years old. Hopefully, we'll talk about more recent protests involving ICE. But this was a protest that took place in May of 2020, where my client and his 2 adult children were protesting the death of George Floyd. As your listeners will remember, much of America was protesting that day. And in Los Angeles, Callais Gluck, a 66-year-old white guy who's a member of the Directors Guild of America, went out with his 2 adult children to protest for the first times in their lives. They were going to go. He did not want them to go, but if they were going to go, he decided to join them basically as a chaperone. Okay. They walked for several hours through the streets of Los Angeles with hundreds of other peaceful protesters. At some point, the protests became more violent, and there were police officers who were firing what they call less than lethal rubber bullets at some of the protesters. As they were going home, they were left and confronted by what's called a skirmish line of deputy sheriffs that were blocking off a 6-lane thoroughfare in LA called Beverly Boulevard. When the chaos subsided, Mr. Gluck, who had his camera there as basically an historian, began taking photographs of both the skirmish line of deputy sheriffs and the protesters who were in back of them. They were basically at the front of that skirmish line. While he was taking pictures, he saw a protester that got injured. As he let down the camera to help that protester, he himself got shot in the face with a less than lethal rubber bullet. It embedded in the left side of his nose. And 6 weeks later, doctors were pulling shrapnel and little pieces of metal called bismuth from his nose. His daughter watched in horror as her father was struck and lived with him for the months and years later, where he was impacted by post-traumatic stress disorder. He suffered a traumatic brain injury because of the impact of that blow. He suffered anxiety and depression. And we were able to prove during an 8-week trial how his life had been severely impacted and will never be the same.
Wow.
And after that trial, a diverse Los Angeles downtown jury awarded what is now the largest verdict in the history of Los Angeles for a protest case of totaling $3.8 million.
Outstanding. Outstanding. Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, that I saw his injuries must have been so painful. They were clearly so traumatic and
Pamela, it's
devastating.
really important for your listeners to understand because most of the time, as you know, as a civil rights icon, these clients often look like you and I.
Right.
And the larger public can't really relate. This was the first time in my 45 years of doing these cases that I represented a Caucasian family in a force case.
Wow.
And it was interesting because it related that, but for the grace of God, any one of our jurors could have been there with their children, exercising their First Amendment rights, and their lives be forever changed as a result. And that really resonated with our jury. And I'm sure that led to such a wonderful verdict on behalf of this very deserving family.
Right. Excellent. Excellent. So let's talk about the context in which you tried the case, because now Los Angeles once again is alive with protest and police and confrontations. What have you seen from your perspective? What's going on in LA?
Well, it's interesting because we were in trial during the summer, and in the spring and early summer in Los Angeles, the president had ordered troops to Los Angeles. There were these ICE troops, and there were a lot of news reports about the impact of these guards, the National Guards, here in Los Angeles. There were local companies that were not holding meetings and allowing their employees to work remotely because downtown was often dangerous. So it was in that environment that we held this trial. It's interesting because I used a jury consultant, and the one question that the consultant wanted me to ask every juror was, if you go and attend a protest and you get injured, is it shame on you because that's the risk you take for having gone? And even though our trial was during the summer, so there was a large number of college age students, we were stunned at how there was a groundswell of belief by all of the jury panel, the majority, that if you go to a protest and you are injured, shame on you.
Wow.
That was a response that we really didn't expect. And it really created a cauldron for a hotly contested trial, such as the one that we were in.
Wow. Wow. So folks were pretty much saying you took the risk, it's on you.
That there is a real risk of danger and violence. And if you are injured, you have the right to protest, but that's on you.
Wow.
There was not the level of empathy that we expected, especially from Gen Z and millennial age jurors that would understand the greater issues and the importance of going out and protesting, even if there's a chance that you might get injured in the process.
Wow.
They weren't feeling that at all.
Wow. So, what is the value of the First Amendment, right, in these times where it gives you the right to protest and you're supposed to be able to voice your opinion with your feet? What is happening in LA? Is that actually gonna make a difference then?
Well, I think it is fortunate that I live in Los Angeles as opposed to 95% of America. But there's a danger that your listener should understand. We here in California somewhat live in a bubble, and there is much of the world, of the country, that is really being greatly impacted by social media. And there's a clarion call, I think, that all of your listeners should recognize and understand about just the fundamental threat to the foundation of our democracy is being challenged when you have politicians exercising personal vendettas and prosecutors that are falling in lockstep, respecting an office holder as opposed to the Constitution for which they took an oath. It's a real risk, and we need more warriors like you and your listeners to stand up for those values that we hold dear in our democracy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because the democracy is fragile and we can see it being subverted every day, quite frankly. So tell me, what has last week I had, recently we had Maggie Beth Mendez from Amigo, LA, to talk about the impact of ICE raids and the ICE presence on the immigrant community. She represents and works with undocumented immigrants who are in the process of trying to become citizens, but that has become almost a non-starter in Trump's America. But from your perspective, what has been the impact of the ICE, the national troops? Because we're talking about 700 Marines and 4,000 National Guard troops were sent to Los Angeles over the objection of the governor, right?
Yes.
So how has that impacted the African American community in Los Angeles?
Not only over the objection of the governor, but also over the objection of the mayor of Los Angeles, Mayor Karen Bass. And it's funny, Pamela, because we had spoken earlier today about the topics that we'd be discussing, and I don't have my ears on the streets of Los Angeles like I used to, but I have two young lawyers who are recent grads whose ears are on the streets. Both of them are African American families of immigrants. And I asked them about what is the response of their friends, their families, and their colleagues about this entire thing with troops who are no longer here in Los Angeles. And they were really limited to just a couple of blocks downtown. Mm-hmm. And their response probably echoes much of America. There was a stark dichotomy. On one hand, many of their African American friends weren't vocally supporting the protests against ICE. In many ways, it is a response to what they perceive was a Latino support of Donald Trump, shockingly, to the detriment of the race and the culture. So on one level, it was, see, we told you so, or it serves you right, or, this is what you get for supporting this man. Mm-hmm. And one of my young associates is an Ethiopian immigrant, second generation, but she was telling me that her immigrant friends of the African diaspora were far more likely to be engaged and active in the protests than her African American friends and colleagues. One of my young lawyers is a Latina sister working for a civil rights firm. She's a very actively engaged member of her community. And she told me that she herself had been at several ICE-related protests, more than once, more than one day. And she said, though she has several African-American friends and colleagues or coworkers, student friends, none of her black friends that she was aware of had taken part in those protests like there was much greater participation years earlier following George Floyd's death. So it really reflects, I think, the challenges that are confronted by the African American community when, on the one hand, there are strong feelings against the use of military looking people with guns and bayonets coming into the city as a police occupying force. And at the same time, there's a distinct thought, however regrettable, that this one is not our fight. And I'm sure there are others across the country with similar views.
Yeah. Yeah, we've heard that, and I recall early on in the early demonstrations, there was a lot of comments going around social media, in particular, that Black women need to rest. We get to take a day off because we done saved democracy more than once. Okay, we did our part,
Yeah.
and how many times can we say? We told you he was a racist,
Correct.
okay?
Yes.
We told you he was a racist.
Correct.
Why? How could you not know? How could anybody vote for him who is not a racist, right?
Correct.
Unless one would think that the only people that would vote for a racist are racists. But, I certainly, as a political activist myself, I can say that's not true. I have been in rooms where it's like the racism gets a pass, and it's to the detriment of all of us.
I'll take your word for it, my sister, because I am one of those too that think if you don't know by now
Right.
about his racism, I don't need to talk to you anymore. So I understand that not all supporters of him are racist, but it is certainly troubling how many supporters in this country overlook his racism for what they think is their own personal good.
Right. Exactly. Too many people in America are willing to sacrifice people like you and I to get what they think they're going to get from him. And that
Yes.
it's the downfall of the whole country. And again, it's, we do have to overcome this thing that says, we told y'all. I mean, like, we did it. We told you not to vote for him, but you did anyway. So guess what? Now we're all in the soup, right? And that, at the end of the day, we're all in the soup because,
Surely. And
know,
Pamela, this is your show, and I don't want to take over your show, but I'd love to hear your perspective on the reports of why African American men seemed to support Donald Trump this time in greater numbers than his first election. What do you think was the reason?
I think that our sister Kamala had a long history, tortured somewhat relationship with Black men, with the Black community, and she was vulnerable. And I think that got exploited, in ways. The first time she ran, there were those of us who were saying, this might be a problem. But, this time she was the candidate. And I'm not going to lie, I went to Chicago and I was excited and for the Democratic convention. I left there thinking, oh, this is going to happen. We got this. And was, stunned to see that even anybody, Black men, Latino men, anybody would vote for this person knowing what we know. And, I think that there was a level of sexism. I think there was a level of resentment around her record as a prosecutor that got exploited. And, having been a prosecutor now, having made that transition, I often had to address brothers around my role is going to be to hold people accountable even while I'm seeking justice. Justice and accountability are not mutually exclusive, okay? And it's not that we disagree on whether or not people should be punished. More often than not, the question is, what should the punishment be?
But sister, in your political, I mean, especially with your progressive background, counteracting with your role as a prosecutor, did you find any backlash from African American citizens in Alameda County as you were campaigning for your job?
Absolutely. I mean,
Really?
the first time we ran, people were like, I'm not voting for a DA. I would never vote for a DA. There were some people who endorsed me both the first time and the second time and said, I never will endorse a DA. I have nothing to say good about the
Sure,
DA.
sure.
I mean, the historical relationship and context, it matters. It
But
absolutely matters.
even on the level of their own self-interest as president, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think what my message was, we have to certainly, I'm going to deal with folks dealing, causing harm to people, but I want to get to the root causes of harm. And we
Yes.
have to use the resources of the system and the opportunity to get to the root causes of harm. And we have to address the prior harm that was caused by the system, the injustices. Progressive prosecutors are the only ones that are willing to look at wrongful convictions, that are willing to look at, the death penalty scandal that we had here, where, Black men were targeted and prosecuted using the death penalty, regardless of guilt or innocence, okay? And regardless of the facts of the case, it was a game. And they didn't allow Black people, particularly Black women or Jewish jurors, to sit on the juries. That's a constitutional problem that you need a constitutional lawyer to address. All right, Mr. Douglas, I know that you also are very close to and have been a big supporter of Mayor Karen Bass. And in this season, the mayors, particularly Black mayors, have been targeted and have been really called to action. What is happening with Mayor Bass in LA?
Well, let me first tell you, I have been a supporter of Karen Bass before she ever got into politics. She was the leader and the executive director of a community group here in Los Angeles called Community Coalition.
Okay.
And they were involved back in the day of trying to slow the abundance of liquor stores in the Black and brown communities. At one point in LA, there were more liquor stores than McDonald's restaurants.
Wow.
And that was an abomination. So she's always been very active. She had a rocky time for a while in January of this year from the LA fires that devastated a large portion of the Palisades. By chance, at that time, she was in Africa on a goodwill tour, and she caught a lot of negativity from not being physically present when the fire first started. She was perceived as being vulnerable in the spring of this year, especially because there was a discussion and an effort to recall her. And there were whispers that Rick Caruso, the Republican businessman who ran against her last term, was contemplating another run against her next year when her reelection comes up again. Okay. Since the ICE demonstrations, however, that has really, I think, benefited her politically. She has been out front making very strong stands in favor of the citizens of Los Angeles and against the overreach of our president. Right. And those very strong stands and the profile that she has shown and just the strength of her character has strengthened her position politically. She fought back the recall campaign, and I think she is considered now a very strong candidate for re-election next year.
Okay. Yeah, I think it was Dr. King said that you can only see the stars when in the darkness. You have to wait for the dark to see the stars come out.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And, as Black women, we know when times get tough, we got to be tough. So I'm not surprised at all. I'm not surprised.
It's really ironic because advisors who were close to her when things were at its most pessimistic were trying to tell her, you have to find someone that you can pick a fight with. And she was reluctant to mess around and do anything that might upset or generate the ire of our president, because she understands, with Los Angeles being the host of the Olympics in 2028, it's real important that there be the support of the president, who can be very vindictive. But this controversy concerning the deployment of federal troops caused her to really reach into her soul and who she is as a person, irrespective of who she is as a politician. Yeah. And she took up the mantle and took on the fight. And she was strengthened by that. She can sometimes be criticized for being a bit too cautious. But in this moment that tested her, she came through with flying colors. And we're all very proud of the job she's continued to do on behalf of all the citizens here in Los Angeles.
Excellent, excellent. Well, you mentioned the fires, and I know when we had first talked about having you come, one of my concerns was the impact of the fires. And, for us in Northern California, we are fire prone. We've seen some fires, but nothing like what happened in LA. So can you share with us a little bit? I know you were very active supporting families at that time.
There were two separate fires that took place in two distinct areas of Los Angeles County. The Eaton fire, which took place in the Pasadena, Altadena area, and there was a separate fire that took place in the Palisades, West Los Angeles, Malibu area. The Altadena fires destroyed 9,400 homes and 19 people died. There were 12,000 structures that were destroyed in the Palisades fire. And so there's an active effort now, not only to clear the burned land, but to rebuild. Altadena, in particular, was an African-American stronghold. At one point in the mid-'80s, it was as much as 41% Black, because in the 60s and the 70s, there was no redlining in that area as there was at that time in much of Los Angeles County. So Black middle-class families could purchase beautiful homes with views in the foothills of the Angeles mountain range there that borders Pasadena. I represent several families who have been impacted by that devastating fire. And it's regrettable. There's a main street, Altadena Boulevard, that travels through most of the city. The east side is predominantly white. The west side is predominantly Black. And we're still trying to figure out why there were evacuation orders in the east side throughout the night after the fires. But it took until 3 o'clock in the morning before there were ever evacuations on the west side of Altadena, and 18 of the 19 deaths were on the west side of this main drag. So there's still issues involving aspects of environmental racism and discrimination, even something as fundamentally basic as a wildfire.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. We see that. Isn't that terrible? Terrible.
And it's just funny because living here in Southern California, we have frequent wildfires, frequent floods. When friends or colleagues hear about them on the news and call me up, I always would say, that's not us. Don't worry about the wildfires. Don't worry about the floods. This time, however, it impacted us too. My grandparents bought homes in Altadena. There were 20 of my law partners, Kappa friends, who lost homes there. Wow. So it really touched Black and brown people in ways that we had never seen before. And that's why it's so very important that we try to stress the importance of those families returning to that area in the face of these lawsuits and what might be 5 to 10 years before they will ever be able to rebuild again. It's a very daunting challenge indeed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things that I pioneered at the Alameda County DA's office was suing the insurance companies who had underinsured homes routinely. And we
Yes.
had evidence that was a pattern and a practice. And we were just starting to scratch the surface and, had some really hot lawyers like you on it. We were on it.
Yes.
And my successor came in and fired the lawyers like within her first week. She fired them without looking at the cases at all, and then dismissed the cases. And
that's so unfortunate because I had heard great things about how you and your administration was able to recover millions and millions of dollars on behalf of the good people of Alameda County. So it's really regrettable that they did not have greater insight to appreciate the value that those lawsuits can really have.
Right, exactly. Consumer justice is very real and it impacts the whole community. And we had the opportunity not only to vindicate and protect people's assets, but to get those millions of dollars that we could then invest in public safety programs, right?
Yes.
And I know I sponsored 2 years in a row, I sponsored the Bay Area Narcotics Anonymous conference because addiction is a major factor in crime, right? And
Sure.
so you begin to amplify the resources available and the opportunity for people to live clean and sober lives. That's going to impact public safety. And we were fortunate to have those relationships as well. But folks didn't see that. They saw something else. So all right, Douglas. Well, thank you so much for joining me on Pamela Price Unfiltered. Again, I am so proud of you and the work you have done. We appreciate so much your perspective on what's happening in Southern California. California is a bubble, but we are all in this bubble together, and we will see. You all are seeing the first steps of the National Guard. Like you say, they're gone now. They went to Portland.
Yeah, right. Moving on.
They're moving on. We're terrified that they're going to come to Alameda County. We know it's just a matter of time.
Yes.
So
well, listen, thank you so much for having me on, and please have me back again.
Of course. Thank you, Douglas. Take care. This is life in Trump's America. The fight against the Trump invasion is on. In Chicago, Portland, and LA, the people are rising up. We will not go quietly into military rule. So there is good news. In California, Attorney General Rob Bonta and Governor Newsom are leading the charge to protect our democracy. In Oregon, Governor Tina Kotek and Mayor Keith Wilson are not lying down. And Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson is on fire. His message is classic Bernie Mac. I ain't scared of you, MFs. Oregon Attorney General Dan Rayfield filed a successful lawsuit in Oregon that argues that the president lacks authority under Title 10, specifically 10 United States Code Section 12406, which allows the president to federalize the National Guard only when there is an invasion by a foreign nation, a rebellion against the government, or when federal laws cannot otherwise be executed. Attorney General Rayfield pointed out sending in 200 National Guard troops to guard a single building is not normal. If you had a concern about safety at your home, you'd make a few calls and fill the gaps, not call in the Army. What we're seeing is not about public safety. It's about the president flexing political muscle under the guise of law and order, chasing a media hit at the expense of our community. In June, in case you missed it, Donald Trump declared that protests threatened the security of ICE detention centers and other federal property, and that these protests constitute a form of rebellion against the authority of the United States government. It was based on Trump's declaration that Pete Hegseth immediately federalized 4,000 members of the California National Guard and sent them, along with 700 Marines, to Los Angeles. In September, Judge Charles Breyer ruled that Trump's use of federalized National Guard here in California is illegal. While Trump's appeal of that order is pending, what does he do? He moves the California National Guard from California to Portland, Oregon. Judge Breyer got it right. Trump intends to create a national police force with himself as its chief. That is the intent and the meaning of Executive Order number 14339. Oregon District Court Judge Immergut agreed, stating that, quote, this historical tradition boils down to a simple proposition. This is a nation of constitutional law, not martial law. Defendants have made a range of arguments that, if accepted, risk blurring the line between civil and military federal power to the detriment of this nation. Judge Immergut starts her decision in this framework. This case involves the intersection of three of the most fundamental principles in our constitutional democracy. The first, the relationship between the federal government and the states. The second, the relationship between the United States Armed Forces and domestic law enforcement. The third, the proper role of the judicial branch in ensuring that the executive branch complies with the laws and limitations imposed by the legislative branch. Whether we choose to follow what the Constitution mandates with respect to these three relationships goes to the heart of what it means to live under the rule of law in the United States. The bad news is that not only are Trump and his minions undeterred by court orders or the Constitution, Trump has put enough judges in high places to rule his way. All of them have shown us they have no regard for the rule of law. People are being assaulted, injured, and killed as a result of these Gestapo-type tactics. The Supreme Court has said it can happen with total disregard for the Constitution at bus stops, car washes, parks, day labor, pickup sites, tow yards, or farms. In Chicago, a man apparently trying to escape ICE was fatally shot by an ICE agent who was allegedly being dragged by his car. And an ICE agent also in Chicago shot a female protester. In LA, a farm worker fell from a greenhouse roof during an ICE raid and died. Another man in Los Angeles was struck and killed after he ran onto the freeway, apparently trying to escape an ICE raid on a Home Depot. What does an ICE raid look like in America today? Unmarked SUVs with tinted windows speed up, masked men in military camouflage garb with M4 rifles and short guns jump out. They interrupt everything and they detain everybody in sight. In Chicago, 300 federal agents rappelled from a helicopter to raid a 5-story apartment complex. A 5-story apartment complex with 130 units, all disrupted, invaded in the middle of the night. ICE terrorized the residents, traumatized the neighborhood and the entire city. It was reported that they made 37 arrests, only 2 of them allegedly Venezuelan gang members.
I spoke to one woman who actually lives in this building, and she says she was detained by ICE agents overnight, and she says they took everyone and then asked questions later.
They just treated us like we were nothing.
Patricia Fisher says she came out to the hallway of her apartment complex on the corner of 75th and South Shore Drive in her nightgown around 10 Monday night, only to find ICE agents yelling police.
It was scary because I've never had a gun put in my face. They asked my name and my date of birth and asked me did I have any warrants, and I told them no, I didn't.
She says she was then handcuffed and released around 3 a.m. Fisher says she was told if anyone had any kind of warrant out for them, even if it was unrelated to immigration, they would not be released. Citizen App video shows the chaotic scene overnight. Neighbors tell us there were dozens of ICE agents. Neighbors like Ebony Watson says they ducked for cover as they heard several flashbangs go off.
They was terrified. The kids was crying. People was screaming. They looked very distraught. I was out there crying when I seen the little girl come around the corner. Because they was bringing the kids out too. Had them zip tied to each other. That's all I kept asking. Where's the morality? Where's the human? One of them literally laughed. He was standing right here. He said, them kids.
Watson says budget trucks and military-style vans were used to separate parents from their children. Other neighbors say they saw agents destroying property to get in the building.
And they had a big 15-inch chainsaw with a round blade on it cutting this fence down. We're under siege. We're being invaded our own military.
The FBI did confirm this morning that they did help the U.S. Border Patrol carry out a targeted immigration enforcement operation in this area, and they say they have been supporting these efforts at the direction of the U.S. Attorney General.
Imagine being a child awakened in the middle of the night by a Black Hawk helicopter landing in your neighborhood. Imagine an armed stranger forcibly removing you from your bed, zip-tying your hands, separating you from your family, and detaining you in a dark van for hours. This didn't happen in a country with an authoritarian regime. It happened in Chicago. Those are the powerful words from Governor J.B. Pritzker. In Portland, the photograph of a DHS officer pepper spraying 19-year-old Leilani Porter because she called them stupid shows the level of disregard for the First Amendment and peaceful protest. Donald Trump, Pete Hegseth, Kristi Noem, Stephen Miller are all at war with the American people, and they have weaponized our government. So what can we do? We must demand that our elected officials hold the line, like Mayor Brandon Johnson, like Governor Pritzker, Governor Tina Kotek, and Mayor Keith Wilson, Governor Newsom, and Attorney General Bonta. Do not allow local law enforcement to acquiesce to ICE, DHS, or the National Guard while paying lip service to the resistance. Hold every governing body and local law enforcement accountable to we the people. As long as we are not afraid to resist, to speak out, to support and defend the Constitution, Donald Trump and his fascist regime will fail in America. Thanks for tuning in to Pamela Price Unfiltered. Please subscribe to this YouTube channel for free and go to Substack and become a paid member. Your support keeps the conversation raw and unfiltered. Thank you for listening, and you can listen to this podcast wherever you get your podcasts.